Boys and girl, a lot has happened in this past week. There's been two massive posts on the Tinto Talks part of the Paradox forums where Johan actually admits the start date of EU5, which is the 1st of April 1337, and then we also have a proper dev diary about the estates, and in that dev diary we also have the very first political map of Europa Universalis 5. In the previous week we had the province map, and then because the community is extremely well gifted and people have actually pieced together the borders from that map, Paradox decided might as well give them the actual political map now, since they've already caught on to it by now. This is basically what it looks like. We're gonna analyze this map, as well as I want to have the main topic of today's video, aside from going over the dev diaries, which we're gonna do initially, I want to explain in detail why Johan chose the 1st of April 1337 as the start date for EU5, and the things that we'll be seeing in EU5 as consequence of 1337 being the start date. I'm gonna do a proper historical analysis, and I'm gonna be using the Voltaire's Nightmare map mode for 1337, which is one of the closest map modes out of all the ones we have for EU4 right now. Obviously it is not the EU5 map, but this is a good framework for better understanding what we can expect from EU5's new start date. I also want to point out that according to Johan, the start date for EU5 was decided when they started developing for EU5. So that means 4 years ago in 2020 when they first started developing. Johan also says in another one of the forum posts that the development started in the second quarter of 2020, which probably is around May or June of 2020, right? And around that time also they started planning up the history of the game and everything that goes alongside it. I didn't know that personally. I thought that they just added a little bit later and they just did the engine first and so on, but apparently I was wrong. So we live and learn, and that's one of the beauties about scouring the EU5 forum posts, isn't it? Because if we go to the forums and we click only show dev responses, Johan has replied to over 200 forum questions, and from these replies he's given more sneak peeks into what EU5 is all about. And I'm going to go through these replies also. But first, let's start it off, of course, with the Tinto Talks number 5. We have a little bit of an artwork at the beginning here, which is of the French king. And that also tells me that EU5 is going to be going up until this time period. They wouldn't have this in the game unless it goes all the way up to that time period. This also tells me that it's likely EU5 is going to end in 1836. In my previous video, I said that it's likely going to end in the 1600s. Now, Ludi, you're contradicting yourself. Yes, because at the time, I didn't have the information that I have now, which is why it's a good idea to keep up with the videos that I make about E5's development, because more information appears and we learn a lot of new things as more information appears, right? So this image here, together with the fact that Johan has done two things in the post where he replied to people, one of them, and I'll show you that right now, is this particular reply where he answered Yarsky's question, how to reduce power creep in Project Caesar. And Johan says, part of the reason for the power creep is enormous amounts of things you can stack together, especially mission bonuses. In the development of content for Project Caesar, we have a rule that says no modifier stacking. Now, what does this imply? It implies that you're not going to be able to have admin efficiency plus 90% or core creation cost minus 90%. That is not going to be a thing. In fact, he repeats the same thing in a few other posts. He intentionally mentions there's going to be no modifier stacking. He's doing this intentionally so that if you want to do a world conquest or you want to do something that's a little bit more grand, you have to play the game for longer. As such, this, together with the picture from the dev diary, really tells me that we probably will at least see the game go up until the 1700s, if not early 1800s as well, to make the connection with Vicky 3. And as such, it's likely that we're not going to see another March of the Eagles sequel, which is something I was kind of hoping that we would see, right? I'm genuinely curious what you guys think about this. Are you happier with seeing no modifier stacking so that in order to do a world conquest or expand like crazy, you really have to play a few hundred years? Or do you like the system that we have in EU4 right now where you can modifier stack and then, you know, just kind of not abuse it, but, you know, I guess abuse it, yeah. Also, I'm gonna address the little cutouts in the map here above. So this is basically impassable terrain. But from what Johan has replied to people and from one of the previous dev diaries, what this actually means is that you will be able to choose whether you want to see or not see this impassable terrain. So for example, these parts here, this is impassable terrain to signify mountains or areas that are really hard to pass through. And if you don't want to see it, you have an option to just make it the same color as your nation's color, or you can keep it like this. Also, he does mention both in the dev diaries, like I said, and in one of the comment threads, that you will be able to pass through these impassable terrains at a certain cost. So he mentions that, I think, in the second dev diary, if I'm not mistaken, where one of the new types of terrain is going to be the impassable one that you'll be able to send units through, but you get a high amount of attrition. In one of the posts he replies to it as well, he says that we cannot discuss more about this right now, but there will be a dev diary in the nearby future where we go through the new impassable terrains in more detail, so keep that in mind. Let's go quickly through the dev diaries. I keep talking about everything else except the dev diaries, but obviously that's because I'm really mega freaking hyped and excited about everything that's happening right now. This dev diary is essentially dedicated to the estates mechanic, which is basically identical to the EU4 estate mechanic with a few differences, of course. So he mentions that this is one of the core systems in the game, and there are 4 estates in EU5 which mostly map one-to-one with the social class. So that's different from EU4. It's not a set amount, it's based off of your population. And the estates are nobility, clergy, burghers, and the commoners. There's also the crown, which represents the state itself. Each estate gains power based on the amount of population belonging to the estate, which is also modifiable by local attributes of where the population is, where some nobles may have very high power in certain areas, or whether a specific city has entrenched burgher rights there. So that means that the nobility, especially most likely at the start of the campaign, is going to have the majority of the crownlands if it is a very feudal system where the nobility is in charge. But then at the same time, you will have nations in which the clergy has a lot of power because it is a theocratic government, or you have burghers in power because it's going to be a republic and they get certain modifiers to boost up the estate power of that particular estate. This is the first sneak peek of what the estate looks like. We have nobility, crown, clergy, burghers, and commoners, and these right here are the privileges, by the way. So we know that you can at least give 5 privileges max. That's what we have for the nobility. It could be that you can have up to here, which would be like 10 privileges max. I don't know. Clearly the plus button here is going to be how you add privileges. This is the loyalty I'm judging based on the fact that this is a happy face, so they're happy, right? And 57.38% is different from 57.36%, and all of these here are different actually. So what I'm assuming is that the top one is the actual loyalty or happiness, and the bottom one is the loyalty slash happiness equilibrium, which in essence means, as the same as for EU4, obviously, the estate will try to reach the specific equilibrium, and that is actually confirmed by the fact that this particular icon has a going up sign, which means that it's trying to reach 95.98%, which is the equilibrium of happiness for the commoners, and it's currently at 86%. We also see the percentage of crownlands owned by each estate. We have 6% owned by the nobility, 32% by the clergy, 20% burghers, 19% commoners, and 23% owned by the crown. I do assume there's going to be a lot of events and a lot of things you can do to influence this massively, and as you progress in the campaign, likely most of the power is going to go to the crown or the people, who's to say, right? Depending on what you play as. This is the estate part of the government view, where you can see their power, current satisfaction, the equilibrium it trending towards, and what privileges it currently has. Estate part of the government view. So the government view, that implies that we're going to have the same system as we have in EU4, where you have on the side of the screen, not the whole screen, the estates, the diplomacy, national ideas, or whatever might be available in EU5, essentially the same like it is in EU4, which is great news. I'm happy to hear that actually. Now this is really important up next, right? Every 1,000 nobles to be more precise, gives 50 estate power to their estate, whilst 1,000 peasants gives merely 0.05 estate power as default. That is because there's going to be, of course, a lot less nobles in your country than there's going to be peasants, which will make up the bulk of your population. So this is obviously to balance things out. Otherwise, every nation is going to have 100% power for the peasants, right? And everyone's going to be a communist essentially, right? Then these are modified locally in every location as mentioned above, and then in the entire country by laws, reforms, and most notably the privileges that you have given to the estates. That's great to hear. And also the fact that it says modified locally, that tells me that every single province is going to have a different makeup of the estates. Now, does that mean you'll be able to handle the estates on a province base or only handle it on a nation base? That's an interesting thing I'd like to get an answer for, but obviously I'm probably not going to get it. The total power of all 4 estates and the crown together add up to 100%, which is the effective power they have. That is the one shown right over here. Together it adds up to 100%. Depending on your crown power, you either get a scaling penalty or scaling bonus on aspects like the cost of revoking a state privilege, the cost of changing policies and laws, the efficiency of the cabinet. Remember, the cabinet is basically your advisors. We learned that from the previous dev diary. There's no more advisors like in EU4. EU5 is going to have a cabinet, which is a mixture between the council from CK3 and the advisors from EU4. I don't know how it's going to work, but probably something similar to the CK3 one, but maybe a little bit more dumbed down, not as in-depth as the one than CK3 is, I'm assuming. If your crown power is weak, you need to have the estates really satisfied, or you will not get much out of any parliament you try to call. That's the same like in EU4. When your crown land is very low, you get some debuffs. In the case with EU5, there's going to be debuffs whenever you call the parliament, and I'm assuming there's likely going to be some static modifiers when you have low or high crown lands as well. Each of the 4 estates has a current satisfaction and an equilibrium it will move towards. Some estates and some countries will have the estate satisfaction move quicker to the equilibrium than others. Each estate has 2 factors per type of estate in which their satisfaction impacts the entire country, where satisfaction above 50% gives a scaling bonus and below a scaling penalty. Now this is really juicy. If the satisfaction is below 25%, that's a very specific number, this estate will not provide any levies. Take a note of this. Will not provide any levies. Guys, this is the first combat confirmation we get for EU5. There's gonna be a levy system in EU5, and this is the first confirmation. So that means we're gonna see something similar. And by the way, there's other comments where Johan replies, this is gonna be similar to the levy system from Imperator Rome. So if you haven't played Imperator Rome, I recommend you check it out. Play it a little bit right now, see what the levy system is like. Maybe similar to the CK3 levy system. Who's to say? I don't know. Maybe a mixture between the two. Nobody knows. But what we do know is that there is going to be a levy system, and if the estates are not loyal, they will not provide levies. So that means the levies are based off of the estates. You're going to have levies from the burghers, from the clergy, from the nobility, from the commoners. Who knows? Interesting though. Most importantly, the estate satisfaction also impacts the satisfaction of the pops that belong to that estate, possibly creating rebel factions or even civil wars. Now, from what I read in another one of the replies from another question in the forum, Johan mentions that the civil war system in EU5 or in Project Caesar is going to be similar to the Imperator Rome civil war system, which is, I mean, it's really punishing. Obviously, it's not going to be the exact same as in Imperator Rome, maybe a little bit less punishing, but as it stands right now, the Imperator one is probably the most punishing civil war systems out of all Paradox games, in my opinion. Nobility impacts your prestige gain and your counter espionage. I like to see that the 4 estates have specific things that they will be obviously impacting. Clergy impacts your research speed and diplo reputation. Burghers impact your merchant power and production efficiency. Commoners impact your food production and your stability cost. So there you have it, boys. Another really big important thing, we have food production. That means that your nation will likely have to be able to sustain itself from a financial perspective as well as from a food perspective. You could have famine in the game. You could maybe even starve your population into submission. Who's to say? This opens up a massive can of worms, if you ask me. Food production, my man. Food! Let that sink in. Maybe you're gonna need to have food in your armies when you're traveling from province to province so that you don't starve out your army from attrition. And that also means there's likely not gonna be a supply system like we have in EU4. It's likely gonna be more similar to the donkey system from Imperator Rome, where you need to bring donkeys that carry the food with the army, and that's what's going to decide whether you get attrition in provinces or not, or at the very least be one of the things that will decide the attrition. So what impacts the satisfaction equilibrium of an estate? The privileges they get, the current stability. Some reforms may impact some laws, how you tax them and how much you tax them. So that means you can tax tax your estates separately based on the estate. I guess some examples include clergy being happier with higher religious unity, or burghers liking having more market centers in your country. Does that mean we can maybe establish market centers in every province if we had the finances for it? Or what does that imply? Estate privileges, then, you may feel forced to grant privileges to estate to be able to tax them more, and you may be forced to grant privileges to get their support in parliament. All privileges impact the power of their estate and may also impact the satisfaction equilibrium. They also have some impact on gameplay fitting the privilege, and often they impact a societal value of their country. Societal value of the country, okay. We have one example here, the free mobility for peasants, which offers plus 10% loyalty, equilibrium, and happiness, whatever, right? But it offers them 20%, I'm just gonna call this influence, right? Because it kind of feels like the influence and loyalty system from EU4, it's basically the same. Now, big take from this, though, is the fact that it says allows peasant to migrate. So that means you'll be able to allow or deny your people from migrating to other countries. So that means we might have a system in EU5 where, in order to grow from a financial perspective, to grow from a military perspective, you would need more population, and you would need to incentivize people from other countries to migrate to your country. Is that going to be a thing? I don't know. This kind of hints at something of the sorts, though. So this game's going to be an amalgamation of the best stuff taken from Wiki 3, from Imperator, from CK3, from EU4, and basically create the ultimate grand strategy game. That's the vibe that I'm getting right now. This might actually be the biggest project they've ever worked on. There are many different privileges and many unique ones depending on where and what type of country you play. We mentioned taxes before, and this is not the development diary where we go into details about the economic system. It is important to mention the estates of a country have wealth that is increased by the amount of money that you have not taken from them in taxes. The rich estates will use their wealth on many things, such as investing in the things that benefit them, but will also build things that are benefiting the country. So that means the estates are going to be building buildings in your country if they have the excess money to be able to build those buildings. Next week is going to be juicy as well, because apparently they're going to be talking about some concepts that are new concepts altogether to the game and have not been presented in previous games at all, as well as talk about proximity control, maritime presence, concepts that need to be talked about in detail before you delve into the economic system. I'm guessing the economic system is going to be a couple of dev diaries along the way from now. That is really interesting. Let's see what Johan has said in the comment section for this before we go on to the map itself. So Cody Wolf asks a question: will naval passages like the Bosphorus, the Dardanelles, and Danish Belt, etc. be controllable? There are mechanics for those passages that will be revealed later, so it's not likely going to be the same system that we have in EU4, where owning 2 of the 3 provinces, either 2 land or 1 land, 1 sea tile, will allow you access. This is going to be different apparently. Can estates force through law changes and reforms if they are dissatisfied and powerful enough, even if you don't call the parliament? There are ways for that, so that means yes. So it's likely that the estates will change your laws and reforms if they're strong enough. To live without you, nah, it's too much, it's too cringe. Cut that out. I've never played Mayo beyond testing it. I do have employees from the mod, and I really enjoy talking with Giga, which is the creator of Mayo Taxes, and his friends at every ParadoxCon. I have to say, I read this comment in particular because I also got the vibe that a lot of the Mayo stuff made its way into Project Caesar. I'm very glad to see that a lot of the stuff from Mayo is making its way into EU5, because honestly, there's amazing ideas in Mayo, and the modding team that has worked on Mayo, aside from some of them working for Paradox on EU5 now, right? So that's obviously going to influence EU5 clearly, since the people that made Mayo are making EU5, some of them. But it goes to just show, you know, that most of the community is on the same mindset as the developer for EU5, which means we're likely going to have the game that we actually want to have and not, you know, Wiki 3 combat. Here's a very important question posed here. Will achievements be tied to Iron Man anymore? And Johan says, if it's my decision alone, achievements should always require Iron Man. Fair enough. I personally disagree with that though, because unless Iron Man means that you cannot Alt F4, then yes, achievements should require Iron Man. But considering that you can either end task on your task manager for a game to close the game, or Alt F4, then Iron Man is freaking useless, because what's the point? You're literally gonna Alt F4 1,000 times to get a better RNG. Might as well just reload the save game instead of crashing the whole game. But that's just my personal opinion. I actually really love the Wiki CK3 and the CK3 style of getting achievements. Because I'm tired of Alt F4ing to get better outcome, and I'm tired of Alt F4ing when my forts go up to 90 freaking percent, okay? I can just reload the game a lot faster. What are the penalties for revoking privileges, and how easy is it to revoke privileges? He does say that it's going to basically be easy, but you're going to have consequence to live with afterwards. Somebody asks a really good question. Will there be crown privileges? There is a chance for those. Now, if we go back up, we do see that there are no crown privileges right now, and there's no plus to add that. So that tells me that Johan is asking us whether we want crown privileges to be a thing. I think that has a lot of potential personally. I would love to have the ability to give privileges to the crown that would be specific to, you know, giving privileges to the crown. Like somebody suggested, something that lowers corruption or increases corruption but gives you tax or something of the sorts, right? Johan replying with that also tells me that he does not know if the community wants that. So I want you guys to go to the forum and write wherever you can. Let him know that the crown privileges is something you would like to see, if, of course, that's something you would like to see. And write it in the comment section. If you do or you don't like it, write it. I want to see what you think about it, of course. And this is actually the same comment thread where he replies, and he says that the civil war system is closer to the mechanics in Imperator, and that it's overall rather different. So we're not going to get the rebels that we get in EU4. When we get rebels in EU5, it's going to be a big deal. A very, very big deal. Quite literally, provinces will become their own separate nation if it's the same system as an Imperator, and then you just take it back instantly as long as you occupied it during that civil war. Now, Johan has also provided with the same picture as earlier, but this is without the fog of war. The picture from earlier was a little bit darker. That's because he was playing as Aragon when he screenshot the picture. Now he's just taken a screenshot without the fog of war, so we can see it's a lot more lit up. This is what the game's gonna look like on default, essentially. And this is, oh my god, I almost cried a little bit when I saw this. This is beautiful, man. I'm so freaking hyped for this. Like, actually so hyped for this game. You have no idea. So let's go ahead and analyze this map now, and let's also go through another forum post that Johan made a while back. So he made a post where he directly says that there's been a lot of speculation on the date, and some of you have figured out the correct date of the 1st of April 1337. So that is exactly after the fall of Nicomedia, or Izmit as it's called in the Turkish Beylik of the Ottomans, right at the start. That means the Ottomans and the Byzantines, from a historical perspective, if the 1st of April is the start date, they're going to be at war. So Byzantium and the Ottomans are going to have war from day one. That also means that the 100 Years' War is going to start within the first month of the game. And here's the reasons, multiple reasons, why they chose the start date. It starts before the Black Death, which creates an early game challenge. Oh my god, yes. I really want to see how we're going to be navigating the Black Death. This man really gets us, you know? Like, I mean, after all, what is more fun than having a hard day's work and then you go back home to play some EU5 and the kingdom you've been building up just happens to lose half of its population because of a horrible death, and the Turks are about to come knocking and they're all immune to the disease for some reason. I feel like that would be a lot of fun personally. Let's just hope that Alt F4 is still going to be a feature. France's system of feudal loyalty is tested as Edward III is about to embark upon the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War started on the 24th of May 1337 and lasted for surprisingly more than 100 Years' War. It would last for 100 and something years, but I guess people just said, let's round it out to 100 years, right? So that means 1 month until the 100 Years' War starts. There is still a colony in Greenland. That is correct. Now, the colony itself was actually by 1337, I'd say predominantly Christian, but likely there were still massive elements of the Norse religion, as we call it, right? In the 1400s, actually, we have one of the last, early 1400s, we have one of the last documents of people still being around in the Norse colony there. But in 1300s, that's when it all started going downhill. So that's going to pose some really interesting questions. And if you do decide to play as the Norse there, maybe you're going to get the option of colonizing the New World before anybody in Europe does, creating a New World Norse Empire and just coming back and schnapple-duping everybody back in Europe afterwards, right? One of the central themes is the fact that we have a big Byzantium, but Ottomans are about to expand. What does that mean? Well, of course, we can tell from this little map here that despite the fact that the Byzantine Empire is pretty sizable, the Ottomans are about to start quadrupling in size. This was the period when this guy, Orhan Gazi, was in charge of the Ottoman Sultanate or Padishah, Orhan Ghazi, I guess you could call that was his actual title. Now, Orhan is the reason why the Ottomans were as powerful as they were, because during his reign, he saw the conquest of multiple lands. He subdued a lot of the Beyliks in Anatolia. Let's go back to our map here, because Orhan managed to subdue the Karasids. He subdued a lot of other Beyliks, as well as he managed to establish himself in the Balkan Peninsula. After the earthquake that destroyed the walls of Gelibolu, the Ottomans managed to take advantage of that. They crossed into and they made Gelibolu their initial foothold into the Balkan Peninsula, and from there, slowly but surely, they crushed everybody in multiple battles, establishing themselves all around and eventually leading to the Ottoman Empire. Now, I'm assuming that Paradox has some events that will make sure that this will happen, right? Some flavor that will make the Ottomans extremely strong, and some debuffs that will make the Byzantines extremely weak. So despite the fact that the Byzantines might have more land at the start date, I personally expect the Byzantines to be weaker in 1337 than they are in the current 1444 start date for EU4. But that's just my opinion, of course. It would be realistic, to be fair, because in 1337, the Byzantine Empire is on the verge of collapse. Just a few years afterwards, not only did they lose a lot of lands to the Ottomans, they lost prior to that a lot of lands to the Serbians when they established the Serbian Empire, and they essentially just got reduced to multiple Byzantine cities around the coastlines, with Constantinople, of course, with most of the islands, to be fair. The southern bit in here in Morea was, in fact, one of the last footholds of the Byzantines. Technically, even though 1453 is the year where we see Constantinople fall, the Byzantine Empire still survived in the southern tip of the Peloponnese, because the Despotat of Morea, which was obviously a part of the Byzantine Empire, was still around for a few years afterward. But we don't talk about that now, do we? I also want to give big kudos to Paradox for doing their research, because this is actually one of the most accurate maps I've seen of 1337, especially when it comes to the Anatolian bits. And I like how you see here the Ayyubids in the province of Hisn Kaifa. It's not Hisn Kaifa, it's Ayyubids from the start. Little old Hisn boy about to take over the world. Hey, we got Cilicia as well still around at this point. Most of the Beyliks, obviously, the Serbs, the Bulgarians, the Wallachians, and the clusterfuck that is southern Greece. Classic Greek moment right there. Going back to another reason why they decided to start in 1337, well, we have the rise of Timur about to happen. Tamerlane was essentially 1 year old in 1337. He was born on the 8th of April 1336, so he was not even 1 year. He was like 1 year minus 7 days, so yeah. That kid's got a bright future, am I right? If we get the right events for him, of course. Some power at its zenith, but facing big challenges such as Mali, Delhi, and the Yuan, so expect to see proper Yuan scripted flavor from the start. Some others at their start, like the Aztecs, Cusco, Majapahit, Ashikaga shogunate. Brother, the Aztecs at the start, this is the golden age of the Aztecs. So the Aztecs are gonna have a good 100 years extra before the Europeans arrive. Playing in the New World, if they do this right, is gonna be insanely fun in EU5. We get to model the transition from feudalism to modern states, as well as from feudal levies to standing armies. So clearly this tells me that there's going to be two systems of combat. There's going to be the levy system, the standing army system, similar to how the levies and the legion cohorts work in Imperator Rome. That's what I'm expecting, considering that, you know, Johan's making the game and Johan also made Imperator Rome. New institutions are blooming in Italy and the rest of Europe, such as the Renaissance or banking. I'm guessing banking might be a new institution, considering it literally says here, new institutions. So we're probably going to have banking followed by Renaissance, maybe. The HRE is in a moment of change, with three dynasties, Wittelsbach, Luxembourg, and Habsburg, competing for it, and the Golden Bull not yet enacted. It was enacted in 1356, the other proposed start date that I had a while back, which obviously is not the start date anymore. The Catholic Church is at its height. Military orders are crusading in Northeast Europe and the Mediterranean. That means we're gonna get to see the Teutonic Order at its height when they're fighting against the pagan Lithuanians, Romuvas, in order to remove the Romuvas, eh? That's a good joke right there. You be quiet right now. However, the Pope resides in Avignon, which will lead to the Western Schism with Rome. That's right. We get the Avignon-Rome Schism. That's going to be a nasty one. That's going to be a fun one to navigate for sure. England's control on the Isle is waning as the Bruce loyalists press the advantage in the Scottish War of Independence. The Gaelic Irish chieftains begin to reclaim land tracts from the English lords. Meanwhile, the seeds for the last Great Welsh Rebellion is sowing. That actually is pretty well depicted in Voltaire's New Nightmare. To give a little bit of an insight for this, after William Wallace's failed revolt against the English, Robert the Bruce started his own revolt, and after he got his ass whooped, yeah, let's just say that Edward cleans the plate, that's for sure. I guess you could say the English won all of these wars, which tells me that the English are going to be pretty powerful at the start of EU5. That is for sure. They win all of the wars in the Scottish lands and Ireland. They also win a massive amount of battles in France. Remember that this early phase of the English and the French 100 Years' War is the period in which the English make massive gains, because the English army, whether you like it or not, was really strong at the start of the campaign. The English longbowmen absolutely crushed the heavy French troopers, with the later part of the 100 Years' War seeing the French using artillery to crush the English army in return. So different tactics and different military advances made either one of the side gain an advantage throughout this particular conflict. I'm actually really excited to see England having so many challenges. I feel like the English is going to be one of the most fun nations to play in EU5 for sure. An intricate balance of power in Iberia between the Christian kingdoms and the last Muslim footholds. Now, don't get too excited though, because again, I'm going to use the great mod, Voltaire's New Nightmare, to show what's actually like, what the situation is like in Castile. Yeah, it's not going that great for the Muslims. They've pretty much been pushed all the way south. They do have a little bit extra provinces compared to 1444, but still the Castilians are the big dogs here. The major changes are the fact that the Portuguese don't have the foothold in Ceuta yet, and the Muslims still have Gibraltar, so they have ease of access between Africa and Europe still. That being said, the Kingdom of Majorca is independent. Navarra also has a little bit more of a chance at surviving, and more importantly, Castile has a lot of internal fighting, and there's a lot of domestic issues that will need to be handled, but there's not so much we're taking back the lands from the Muslims. That pretty much happened a few hundred years prior to this particular start date, and the Muslims were essentially just grasping onto the last holdings in the south of Iberia, but still gives them a bigger chance of actually taking stuff back from the crown of Castile, especially since the Iberian wedding is 100+ years away from actually happening, right? A different balance of power in regions such as Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Now that is indeed where it gets really juicy, because as you can see, Eastern Europe is very different from the current start date. Eastern Europe is essentially dominated by the hordes still. The Golden Horde is not yet fractured, and as such, they are the big dog here. They're still getting the tributes from the Muscovites, who are significantly smaller, and they haven't yet had the chance to grow in strength in order to fight back against the hordes. Smolensk is around, and it's actually quite big. The Teutons are still fighting against the Romuvas, which are depicted here, and the Lithuanians are divided. It's not one massive Lithuania. We have Samogitia, which is the Romuvan bits, and we have Lithuania, which apparently is also the Romuvan bits, but they do have significant amounts of Ruthenians, which are Orthodox, living under their realms. This is also prior to the proper establishment of Moldova. Moldova was established as a march of the Hungarian crown, where the Hungarians actually picked up Romanians from the Transylvanian parts, and they sent them over to unify the various Romanian pre-state entities, basically like little Romanian, I don't want to say tribes, but yeah, small areas we could call them, right? And they unified them and established a proper march of Moldova to defend against the hordes. That was the purpose why the Hungarian crown formed Moldova, and also Hungary at the time was likely the strongest entity in the Balkans, as well as overall in Eastern Europe with the Poles actually being at the start of the expansion that saw them become one of the great powers of Eastern Europe as well at the time. Take note, there are some inaccuracies with this map from Voltaire's New Nightmare, but don't worry about it too much. It's actually fairly okay considering, right? They've done a pretty good job overall. Here's what we know for sure that the map's gonna look like, right? We have the Mamluks being a massive power in the Middle East at the time. We have the Jayairids also right behind me here. The rise of the Ottomans and fall of the Byzantines, and even Georgia is fairly unified, I'd say, on this map, but not as strong as you would imagine them to be, that's for sure. The Venetians have their little holdings, and I'm kind of intrigued by the fact that we do have little islands that are depicted as separate provinces. So you can tell here, this is one province, this is one province, this is a province, this one a province. There's a lot of really small provinces around, like this is a province, this is a province, which makes me think, is it possible that you can have provinces, or better yet, sorry, you can have locations that are a part of a province? So like the system that works in Viki 3, right? Where you could own parts of a province, I think that would be the best way to describe it, and the other nation owns the other parts, and then once you conquer that part, then you just get the whole province that's going to be one unified province. Is that going to be the case? I think that might actually be the case with EU5, honestly. That would make a lot of sense. Otherwise, the borders would look horrible once you've gotten all the provinces here and you have like tiny little ones all around, right? This was a fun one to do, guys. I really enjoyed this this particular dev diary, and I hope you guys did too. If you want to see more, you know what you need to do. Leave that like, and we got a special video coming where I go through the comments and I directly address the video to Paradox with what I believe is what the community wants to see from EU5. So if you want to chip in, this is your last chance. Write a comment on this video, because these are the 3 videos I'm going to be taking into account when I do the final video edit. Have a great day, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. And I want to give a massive thank you to all of my patrons, channel members, and Twitch subscribers. I would not be able to do this without all your support.